On November 18, 1984, in the humid, dense pine forests of Pine Creek, Alabama, 17 loggers were discovered dead, not victims of an accident, not lost to the wilderness. They had all been killed during a single, horrifying event, a midnight dispute that turned lethal in ways the town of Hickory County would never forget. The first responders described the scene as apocalyptic. Chainsaws still warm, logs strewn across the forest floor, and a silence so deep it seemed unnatural. One of the survivors, a young man named Billy Carver, was found stumbling barefoot along a logging trail, muttering the same chilling words over and over. He warned us. We shouldn't have ignored him. This was not a crime of passion. This was the Pine Creek Harvest, a massacre that exposed desperation, greed, and human fragility in the most isolated corners of Alabama. If you have the courage to hear this story, leave your like and subscribe to the channel. But I warn you, this narrative contains extreme violence based on real events. Pine Creek is a stretch of southern Alabama so remote it appears on few maps. Rolling hills of dense longleaf and loblolly pine dominate the landscape. The air is thick, humid, smelling of wet soil, pine sap, and wood smoke from distant stoves. In late November, the nights are cool, but the forest floor remains damp and earthy from seasonal rains. The logging camp itself sits near the creek that gives the region its name, a narrow, murky waterway that winds through cypress and pine. The camp is a cluster of wooden cabins, makeshift storage sheds, and heavy machinery, mostly operated by local crews and itinerant workers who drift in from nearby counties. Birdsong is muted here, replaced by the constant hum of insects and the distant slap of a tree against the forest floor. Nights are eerily quiet, interrupted only by the occasional owl or the crack of a limb snapping underfoot. For a man who grew up in town, the forest can feel like a living entity, watching, patient, unforgiving. Pine Creek sits in Hickory County, a rural region with a population hovering around 8,000 in the mid-1980s. Jobs are scarce. Logging is dangerous, low-paying, but steady, one of the few ways a man could earn a decent wage. Alcohol is cheap and plentiful. Tensions run high among men who work long hours in harsh conditions, far from their families, and with few distractions besides camaraderie and conflict. Disputes over pay, land rights, and personal grievances are common, and when tempers flare, the isolation amplifies the consequences. The region also carries the deep cultural mark of Southern pride, honor, masculinity, and grudges. Arguments are often settled through confrontation rather than dialogue, and violence, while not every day, is never unimaginable. In the early 1980s, Alabama is a place where modern policing and forensic methods are limited in rural counties. Town sheriffs rely on local knowledge, and small communities protect their own. Outsiders are viewed with suspicion. Logging crews are a transient subculture within this world. Young men from all over the state, and sometimes neighboring states, drift into camps like Pine Creek for seasonal work. They are united by shared labor and solitude, but divided by alliances, grudges, and rivalries that often remain hidden until something snaps. This is the world in which the Pine Creek Harvest would occur, a humid, fragrant forest, a backwater logging camp, and men pushed to the edge by isolation, money disputes, and simmering anger. Smell: pine resin, damp earth, diesel fuel from machinery, faint tobacco smoke. Sound: chainsaws, the scrape of axes, water trickling from the creek, occasional human voices echoing through the trees. Temperature: daytime highs in the mid-60s Fahrenheit, nights dropping to the low 40s, moisture clinging to skin and clothing. Atmosphere: a quiet tension permeates the camp. Men laugh and shout, but under the noise is an undercurrent of unease. Whispers of pay disputes and grudges circulate silently. By mid-November 1984, the men of Pine Creek Camp are already weary, Their paychecks are delayed. Tensions are simmering. Old rivalries surface in small arguments over firewood, cabin space, and machinery use. As darkness descends over the forest on November 17th, no one yet knows that these disputes will culminate in the deadliest night in the county's modern history. Jim Callahan is 38 years old, a wiry man with the sinewy strength of years spent hauling logs through southern forests. His face is narrow, angular, and weathered, with deep crow's feet etched from squinting at the sun through thick pine branches. A faded scar runs diagonally across his left cheek, a memento from a chainsaw accident 5 years earlier. He lives in a small, ramshackle cabin near the edge of Pine Creek. Inside, the smell of pine oil, tobacco, and motor oil mingles with the faint stench of rotting wood. His daily routine is methodical. He wakes before dawn, checks machinery, and inspects the logging trails for fallen limbs. He eats quickly, usually dry biscuits or leftover stew, and drinks strong black coffee. Jim is a man of few words. Neighbors describe him as polite but distant, sometimes bordering on menacing when angered. Psychologists who would later review his case would note a pattern of hypervigilance and deep-seated resentment toward authority and co-workers alike. He has a wife, Martha, and 2 children, but their relationship is strained. Financial stress has frayed the edges of domestic life, and Jim's frustration with his co-workers often carries home. His grievances, both real and imagined, build like pressure in a sealed boiler. Billy Carver, 21, the young, naive logger who survives the massacre. He is slight in build, with sandy hair and a perpetual nervous energy. He dreams of leaving Pine Creek for the city, but is bound by seasonal logging work. Robert, or Rob Jenkins, 34, is known for his booming laughter and quick temper. Married with 1 child, he is a skilled logger but prone to arguments. Eddie Monroe, 27, quiet, methodical, and often alone, he enjoys reading and writing letters to his fiancée. Thomas Tommy Riley, 32, experienced and respected, a natural leader among the crew. Tall, muscular, with a thick beard, he often mediates disputes, but has recently grown wary of Jim. The remaining 13 loggers are a mix of local men and transient workers. Each has a personal backstory, family obligations, debts, aspirations, all humanizing them beyond being victims. Jim has friction with nearly all members of the crew. Arguments over pay, equipment usage, and cabin space have escalated over weeks. Rob Jenkins, in particular, clashed with Jim over machinery safety. Rob accused him of hoarding resources and manipulating logs to maximize personal profit. November 11th, Jim argues with Rob Jenkins over delayed payments for a shipment of pine logs. Voices are raised, threats implied but not explicit. November 13th, Tommy Riley notices Jim inspecting chainsaws unusually late in the evening, muttering about making things right if others cross him again. November 15th, Billy Carver witnesses Jim dragging a heavy timber off limits to the crew. Jim snaps when questioned. "Mind your business, boy." November 16th, a camp-wide meeting is called to address disputes. Tempers flare, and Jim leaves abruptly, muttering to himself about not being taken for a fool. The weather shifts to unusually cold and damp nights, leaving the camp with slick logs and slick tempers. Unrest simmers in quiet corners of the cabins. Men glance over shoulders, whisper about grudges, and avoid confrontations that could explode at any moment. The sheriff's office had received reports of disputes between Jim and other workers, but deemed them typical workplace disagreements. Cabin neighbors heard shouting at late hours, but dismissed it as ordinary laborer frustration. No one predicted that the tensions would erupt in a massacre, because they seemed contained to petty grievances until the night of November 17th, 18th. It is 11 p.m. November 17th. The camp is quiet. Most men have retreated to cabins. A light rain mists the forest, chilling the night air. 11:12 p.m. Jim leaves his cabin. He carries a flashlight and a small hatchet tucked into his belt. His movements are deliberate, silent. Every step is calculated. 11:25 p.m. He reaches the central log yard. He checks each cabin, ensuring no one notices his absence. His mind races. They've mocked me, disrespected me, taken what's mine. Tonight it ends. 11:35 p.m. He confronts Rob Jenkins and Tommy Riley near the machinery shed. Voices rise. Jim, I warned you not to cross me. Rob, Jim, calm down. It's just work. Tommy, step back, Jim. 11:42 p.m. The confrontation escalates. Jim swings the hatchet toward a log, narrowly missing Tommy. Panic spreads. 11:47 p.m. Chaos. Jim attacks multiple men in succession. Some attempt to flee toward the creek. The rain-soaked ground is slick, giving him an advantage. 11:53 p.m. Billy Carver hides behind stacked logs, hearing the screams, frozen in terror. He sees Jim move systematically, as if ticking off names from a list. 12:05 a.m. The massacre continues, ending with Jim retreating into the woods, leaving 16 dead and 1 survivor. Temperature, 42 degrees Fahrenheit, 5.5 degrees Celsius. Mist and rain reduce visibility to 20 feet. Logs, tools, and machinery scattered, creating hazards. The forest amplifies every scream, echoing through the dark. The victims hesitated to fight back. They were caught off guard by the intensity of Jim's anger. The survivor, Billy, credits his survival to remaining silent and immobile, moving only after Jim disappears. By 12:15 a.m., the forest is silent again. Rain patters softly on the scattered logs. Jim has vanished into the darkness. By dawn, the survivors' screams have yet to alert the outside world. The camp is empty, save for the bodies. At 6:17 a.m., November 18, 1984, a sheriff's deputy on a routine patrol noticed a thin column of smoke rising from the cabins. As he approached, a scene unlike anything in his 20 years of service unfolded. 16 men dead, their bodies partially covered by logs and scattered gear. Tools left mid-task, as though the workday had been violently interrupted. Billy Carver, the sole survivor, shivering, barefoot, and mumbling, "He warned us all."
Sheriff Thomas Hargrove immediately secured the perimeter. News traveled quickly. Within hours, a small crowd of anxious townsfolk arrived, whispering prayers and speculating in hushed tones. Detectives from the Alabama Bureau of Investigation were dispatched. The crime scene was unusual in its brutality and organization. Footprints indicated only one assailant had moved systematically through the camp. Hatchets, axes, and machinery were examined for fingerprints and blood spatter. Investigators noted a lack of forced entry. The killer had intimate knowledge of the camp layout. Forensic experts later reconstructed the timeline using blood patterns, positions of bodies, and surviving witness testimony. Each step revealed methodical planning rather than impulsive rage. The Pine Creek harvest shook the region. Families of the victims were devastated, struggling to understand how such violence could erupt in their quiet town. Local churches organized vigils. Volunteers combed the forest for missing personal items. The story attracted national attention, with newspapers calling it Alabama's darkest night in decades. Billy Carver's testimony became central. His recollection, though fragmented by trauma, allowed law enforcement to build a profile of Jim Callahan, a man with grudges, knowledge of the camp, and a meticulous, cold approach to violence. Jim Callahan was apprehended 3 days later, hiding in a creek ravine several miles from the camp. His capture was aided by blood trails and footprints leading to his abandoned cabin. Prosecution presented forensic evidence, survivor testimony, and a timeline of escalating conflict, argued that Jim's actions were premeditated, deliberate, and unprovoked. Defense claimed emotional instability, high stress from financial and family pressures, and prior provocation from the crew. Attempted to plead temporary insanity. Survivor testimony. Billy Carver's voice trembled as he described the methodical nature of Jim's attack, his calm cruelty, and the horror of seeing friends killed one by one. After 4 weeks of trial, Jim Callahan was found guilty on 17 counts of first-degree murder. He received 17 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole. The courtroom was silent as the sentence was read. Family members of the victims wept openly, while Jim remained stoic, his expression unreadable. Jim Callahan remains in Holman Correctional Facility. Reports suggest he has no visitors, communicates minimally, and spends his days in isolation, reading, and maintaining his personal space meticulously. A reflection of the same control and methodical behavior that defined his crimes. Families of the 16 deceased loggers faced financial ruin, psychological trauma, and deep grief. Local support groups were formed, but many struggled to trust outsiders and questioned why warning signs were ignored. Logging camps in rural Alabama underwent stricter oversight. Mental health and dispute resolution programs were introduced for high-risk workplaces. The Pine Creek harvest became a case study in workplace violence, isolation, and early warning signs of extreme behavior. The Pine Creek harvest forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. What drives a man to methodically kill those around him, including neighbors and colleagues he has known for years? How much does isolation, frustration, and societal neglect contribute to human violence? And, perhaps most hauntingly, could any of us under the same pressures have acted differently? Or are we all capable of darkness when pushed beyond limits? This story resists the simple dichotomy of good and evil. Jim Callahan was a husband, a father, a neighbor. His victims were fathers, sons, friends, each with dreams and failings. Human life, fragile and complex, was torn apart by a collision of desperation, resentment, and circumstance. Perhaps the lesson of Pine Creek is not only about preventing violence, but about recognizing our shared vulnerabilities, the consequences of ignored conflict, and the importance of empathy and intervention before tragedy strikes. If this story made you think about the fragile line between order and chaos, or the unseen pressures that can drive men to extremes, leave your like and share this video. Subscribe for more stories that challenge what we think we know about human behavior, morality, and justice. Comment below. Do you believe someone can be truly evil, or are circumstances and choices inseparable?